True crime stories fascinate us because it reveals the darkest corners of human nature: fear, obsession, violence. We think we're safe watching from the outside, but the truth is, it could happen to any of us. I'm Blair Bathory. Welcome to the Something Scary podcast. Thanks for joining us as we descend into the shadows of true crime horror. So, want to hear something scary? True crime hauntings. Sometimes, the people we think we know aren't who they seem. Sometimes words meant to be comforting can turn into warnings that follow you across oceans. Tonight, we'll hear the true story of Kyle, a young man who thought he was leaving danger behind, only to discover that some threats never let go. Thank you, Jack, for submitting this story. It's pretty scary. And please note certain details, including names, have been modified to protect identities. Kyle was just finishing his late-night shift at Walmart before a big move overseas. He'd been saving up for months, and in just a few hours, he'd been on a plane to England, his clean slate, his big adventure. He was tired, but buzzing with excitement. As he clocked out, one of his closest coworkers, Frances, stopped him. "I'm gonna miss you so much, Kyle," she said, pulling him into a hug. Frances laughed softly, but as they pulled apart, her face lingered with a strange seriousness. "Message me when you land, okay? And remember," she smiled faintly, "I'm always here." Kyle thought nothing of it, just words. But later, they would take on a much darker meaning. The drive home was brutal. Sheets of rain hammered the windshield, and every mile, Kyle swore headlights flashed in his rearview mirror. But each time he looked, the road was empty. He chalked it up to exhaustion. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of eyes boring into the back of his head. Finally, he pulled into his driveway. Relief, safety, home. Inside, the house was warm and quiet, the store muffled by walls that had always protected him. Kyle changed quickly, slid beneath the covers, and began to drift off. That's when it happened. Bang! The sound rattled through the house, pulling him upright in an instant. He grabbed his phone, thumbed over the flashlight, and crept into the hall. Every shadow seemed alive. Every creak in the floorboards felt like a threat. At first, nothing. The kitchen was empty, the living room untouched. Then he saw it. Through the sliding glass door, a figure stood in the rain, motionless, watching him. Kyle froze. His light barely cut through the storm, but he swore the figure was smirking. That same burning sensation, that feeling of being watched on the road, came rushing back. He blinked, and just like that, it was gone. Heart hammering, he typed 911 into his phone. Another slam shook the house, and his trembling thumb pressed dial.
911, what is your emergency?
"I think someone's outside my house," he whispered. Dispatch urged him to stay calm. Help was on the way.
Is there somewhere safe you can hide until officers arrive?
Kyle thought of his bedroom closet. He moved quickly, hugging the wall, breath shallow, praying the intruder couldn't hear his footsteps. He pulled open the closet door and shut himself inside. Minutes felt like hours. He could hear something, slow, deliberate footsteps, moving closer than stopping. He covered his mouth to muffle his breathing. Finally, red and blue lights cut across the windows. Police. Relief flooded him as officers swept through the house. One officer found Kyle crouched in the closet, pale and shaking. "You said you thought you saw someone outside?" "Yes," Kyle managed. "I saw them, standing right at my door." The officer hesitated, then told him something that made his blood run cold. "We found muddy footprints leading straight to your bedroom." Kyle's stomach dropped. "And this?" The officer held out a scrap of paper, left neatly on the bedside table. 3 words scrawled in uneven handwriting. "I'm always here." The same words Frances had whispered only hours before. Kyle never spent another night in that house. He stayed with a friend until his flight, luggage clutched tight, his eyes darting at every sound. By morning, he was gone. England was thousands of miles away, and that's exactly what he wanted. Police never connected Francis to the incident. No charges, no leads, just footsteps, a note, and a terrifying young man who wanted nothing more than to disappear. But here's where the story takes a chilling turn. 2 weeks after settling into his new flat in England, Kyle received a package, no return address. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, was a single black scrap of paper. On it, the same jagged handwriting, "I'm always here." No one knew his new address, not even Francis. And that's where Kyle's story ends. On paper, it looks like a case of stalking. Maybe Francis was more obsessed with Kyle than he ever realized. Maybe she got his new address through a friend or even social media and wanted him to know she was letting go. That would make this a disturbing but sadly believable true crime story. But here's where things get murkier. The details line up almost too perfectly with an old urban legend, sometimes called the Watcher at the Window. A faceless figure said to leave notes behind, promising their victims they'll never truly be alone. So was Kyle the victim of a very real, very human stalker? Or was he marked by something older that people only whisper about? Here's what chills me. If it was Francis, there should have been proof. But if it wasn't her, then who followed him across an ocean? What do you think? Was this a twisted crush taken too far? Or the work of the Watcher? And if someone tells you, "I'm always here," do you ever really know what they mean? Kyle's story sits right on the edge of reality and legend. Maybe it was a stalker, maybe it was an old urban legend coming to life, but either way, it's a reminder how easily fear can take a hold. If you were in Kyle's shoes, could you ever truly feel safe again? Do you know someone else who loves horror as much as you do? Share our podcasts and help us spread the scare. Rate, comment, review, and let us know what you think. I love reading your comments, and I try to respond to as many as I can. Thank you to all of our listeners from around the world. Sometimes the dead don't rest quietly. Sometimes they come back to make themselves heard, like in this true crime tale retold and written by Sarah Lukasiewicz. The boy thought she was asleep at first. Zona Hester's body lay at the bottom of the stairs, her dress smoothed out, her hands folded neatly across her chest, her head tilted to the side, just a little too far, like a broken doll arranged in place. But when he stepped closer, the stillness of the scene chilled him. The air was colder than it should have been, and no one who tripped down a flight of stairs ended up looking so peaceful. Someone had placed her there. The doctor was called. But as he tried to examine her, Zona's husband, Erasmus Trout Shoe, never left the body. He hovered, his eyes fever bright, adjusting her clothes, pressing a scarf tight around her throat. He cradled her head like something fragile that might snap if anyone touched it. And listen, that's not how a grieving husband acts. That's how someone protects a secret. Every time the doctor leaned closer, Trout growled a warning. Finally, the doctor muttered a cause of death: childbirth complications. Except Zona wasn't pregnant, not even close. But back then, a man's word outweighed almost anything. The death was ruled natural. She was buried quickly in a small cemetery, her grave marked by a plain headstone. And that should have been the end. Mary Jane Hester, Zona's mother, tried to grieve, but the house was no longer quiet at night. The first time she woke to the sound of slow, dragging footsteps across the floor, the air felt heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. At the foot of her bed, in the pale light of the moon, stood Zona. Her eyes were glassy. Her skin had taken on the gray waxiness of a corpse. Her head slumped at the same awful angle, her hair spilling like a curtain over her one shoulder. And then her neck turned further, far further than it should have, until Mary Jane heard the faint pop of a bone.
"He broke my neck, Mama. He killed me."
Now let me stop here for a second. Imagine this is your daughter. Do you brush it off as a nightmare? Or do you start wondering if the thing you feared most is already in your house? Mary Jane gasped awake, but the air was freezing, her breath fogging in the room. She hadn't been dreaming. The ghost came again the next night, and the next. Each time, the details grew sharper. Zona's lips trembled as she spoke of Trout's cruelty, the sudden rage, the way his hands wrapped around her throat. On the fourth night, she leaned so close Mary Jane could smell the damp earth of the grave clinging to her skin. Her icy breath brushed her mother's cheek as she whispered,
"He will kill again. Don't let him."
When Mary Jane awoke, the sheets around her were cold, as though someone had been lying there moments before. Now tell me, would you still be able to dismiss this as grief? Mary Jane went to the prosecutor. Of course, no one wanted to believe her. "A ghost told you?" they asked. It was just grief. But here's the thing, Mary Jane was relentless. She didn't waver, she didn't back down. Finally, they agreed to dig up Zona's body. The winter ground cracked open as the coffin was lifted from the dirt. When the lid creaked back, the smell of decay rolled out. Doctors examined her carefully this time, and what they found silenced every single skeptic in that courtroom. Her windpipe was crushed. Finger-shaped bruises marked her pale skin. Her neck was broken clean through, so loose it rattled under their hands. Exactly as the ghost had said. Trout Shoe smirked in the courtroom, confident there wasn't enough to convict. He even laughed sometimes, as if daring them to prove it. But then Mary Jane took the stand. The room fell still. You could hear the scrape of her shoes on the wooden floor, the hush of people leaning forward to listen. She told them everything, the footsteps, the cold breath, the twisted neck, the ghost's plea for justice. She never shook, she never blinked. And here's the wild part. She wasn't just talking to the jury. She was testifying for her daughter, as if Zona was standing right there beside her. The jury sat in silence, pale, wide-eyed. When she finished, they didn't hesitate. Trout Shoe was found guilty. He would die in prison, his arrogance eaten away by the weight of Zona's ghost hanging over him. Mary Jane never doubted what she saw. She always said her daughter had come back to her, not to frighten her, but to speak. In Greenbrier County, people still whisper that Zona Hester solved her own murder. Some say if you visit her grave on a cold night, you might feel it. The sudden chill, the weight in the air, a presence blending close to whisper. And maybe the scariest question isn't whether a ghost told the truth, but whether we'd ever listen if it happened again. If someone came to you claiming a ghost revealed a murder, would you believe them? Or dismiss it as grief or imagination? Do you think Mary Jane's conviction of Trout Shoe would have happened without Zona's ghost intervening? Hi, witches. It's Blair Bathory, and I just wanted to come give you some personal updates of mine. I was just in London, and I got to go to some really cool locations. I met a fellow spooky girl, and we did a London horror tour. We started at the 10 Bells, which is where infamously Jack the Ripper met some of his victims. We also went to a Roman cult museum, and we ended the night at a horror-themed bar. You can see some of those videos on my social media now. I also am working on a few new projects. My short film Rim is continuing to do the film festival circuit. If you haven't seen, I wrote and directed a short horror film with the great Bonnie Aarons, as you would know, The Nun, and Emma Raimi, and a lot of really cool, awesome people. And a lot of you have asked me about the birds. I have not seen any birds lately. No birds have been following me. I was getting feathers on my car and at my front door, but those have since ceased. I have a lot of theories, but I'm going to think on it for a little while and get back to you. I am having some very strange dreams. My birthday is next month, and I don't know if it's in correlation with that or what, but yeah, this year has been very strange, and I've taken a lot of time to kind of dive into my spirituality. So I would love to hear in the comments what you like to practice and if you have any tips for me to cleanse or protect myself. All right, that's all for now. I'll see you next week. Sweet Scream Witches. Sometimes it's not the storms outside that haunt you, but the fear and desperation building inside a man pushed too far. Like in this awful crime scene sent to us by David P. Carroll. In the rolling countryside of rural Ireland, the Jackson farm stood quiet and isolated. For generations, it had been the pride of the family. By the time Peter, Paddy Jackson, reached his 70s, he was the only one left working it. Stubborn, proud, and fiercely protective, he refused to leave. But the land around him had changed, and trouble was moving in. At first, it was minor thefts. Tools disappeared, gates were left open, and livestock were spooked in the night. Then came threats and vandalism, broken windows, smashed equipment, and late-night visitors whose intentions were never good. One early Saturday morning, Paddy woke to the smell of smoke. His barn and part of the farmhouse were ablaze. Through the haze of firelight, he swore he saw figures running across his fields. Despite the destruction, he called no one. He said he knew who was responsible, and he would handle it himself. 2 nights later, the intruders returned. They tried to steal a tractor and trailer, smashed his tools, and assaulted him when he confronted them. Bloody and bruised, with a broken nose and black eye, he still refused police help. He confided only in his daughter, Tina, a nurse, who begged him to involve the authorities. Paddy warned her that if she did, he would never forgive her. Out of desperation, Tina told her sister Anne. Together, they tried to intervene, staying at the farm and quietly looking for buyers. Paddy considered their interference betrayal. On a stormy Friday night, 3 young men forced their way into the farmhouse. They beat Paddy and his daughters, then set fire to part of the house and cars. By the time police arrived, they had little to do beyond collecting statements. Paddy's distrust of the system and everyone grew. He ordered his daughters to leave, furious and determined to protect his home alone. From then on, he claimed to hear them, boots crunching in gravel, laughter outside windows, the crash of glass in the barn. Sometimes, he swore he saw shadows moving in the trees, eyes glinting in the dark. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was paranoia. Either way, he felt trapped, hunted, and unprepared for what would come. The night was alive with storms. Wind howled through the hedges, rain hammered the tin roof, and the farm's isolation felt heavier than ever. Paddy awoke to movement in the barn, voices, laughter, the clicking of bottles. The smell of burning straw made his stomach churn. He pressed himself against the kitchen wall, trying to control his fear. The intruders were inside, and he had no backup, no escape. Every instinct screamed that he had to act, but he needed a plan. This time, he didn't reach for his guns immediately. Instead, he gathered what he could, heavy tools, chains, and a flashlight. Each step to the barn was slow, deliberate, the mud sucking at his boots, rain soaking through his clothes. Inside, 4 men were drunk, loud, and careless. They smashed bottles, set small fires in the hay, and laughed at their own chaos. Paddy watched from the shadows, feeling time stretch. He knew he couldn't run. He couldn't call anyone. if they found him first, he was done. The barn was a theater of menace. Lighting illuminated the intruders in brief flashes, casting grotesque shadows across their faces. Patty gripped a crowbar, keeping low. The smell of smoke stung his eyes. The clatter of falling tools from the men's careless mischief echoed like distant gunfire. Suddenly, one of the intruders noticed movement in the corner. A shout rang out. Patty reacted instinctively. Swinging the crowbar at the nearest figure, chaos erupted. Hay and glass flew through the air. The men stumbled, tripped, and fell, some crashing into the walls of the barn. Patty fought with everything he had, each strike fueled by terror and adrenaline. By the end, the barn was silent except for the storm outside. 4 men lay unmoving on the floor, blood mingling with mud and hay. Patty stood in the middle of the carnage, shaking, soaked, and exhausted. He hadn't fired a shot, but the damage was just as deadly. Neighbors had called police after hearing the commotion. Officers arrived to find Patty, the intruders, and the wrecked barn. 4 young men were dead, and the chaos of the scene told a story of desperation, fear, and human fury. Toxicology reports later revealed alcohol and drugs in the victims' systems, confirming that they had been intoxicated and likely unarmed. Patty was arrested at the scene. He did not resist, only saying, "I thought they were going to kill me. I had no choice." The trial gripped the nation. Patty's defense argued self-defense, citing months of harassment, assault, and destruction. A doctor testified that he had become paranoid, sleep-deprived, and mentally strained by the constant threat to his life and property. The prosecution countered that he had not called police, had opportunities to escape, and had chosen to confront the intruders directly, resulting in 4 deaths. They described it as premeditated attack, both of fear and obsession, not necessity. The jury deliberated carefully. They acknowledged Patty's fear, but could not ignore that his actions went beyond reasonable self-defense. He was found guilty of murder. Judge Sheridan described it as one of the most horrible cases I have ever presided over. He acknowledged Patty's age, but emphasized the severity of his actions. "You knew what you were doing," the judge said. "You chose blood over retreat. The choice cannot be excused." Patty Jackson was sentenced to 10 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. 3 years into his sentence, Patty died of a heart attack. His farm, once a source of pride and terror, was sold. Locals still whisper about that stormy night, the barn filled with smoke, fire, and laughter, and a man driven to the edge by fear. Patty Jackson's story is a cautionary tale, how isolation, paranoia, and unrelenting threats can push even a lifelong farmer to act in ways he never imagined. The farm is quiet now, but some say the night's terror linger. Not as ghosts, but as a memory of fear so thick it could drive a man to destroy everything around him. Patty Jackson's story is the kind of nightmare that sticks with you. A quiet farm, a stormy night, and months of fear and harassment that built up until one night he snapped. 4 young men lost their lives, and one old man's life ended behind bars. Was he defending himself, or had paranoia taken over? Maybe that's the real horror, how quickly fear can push someone over the edge, and how thin the line can be between survival and tragedy. Have you ever had to survive, maybe against something supernatural? We love hearing your stories, so send us an email with yours at SomethingScary@Snarled.com. You can send us your own spooky encounters or untold true crime stories at SomethingScary@Snarled.com. And don't forget to tap follow so you're the first to hear every eerie new episode of Something Scary. And we're also looking for 2-sentence horror stories if you want to send one our way. I love reading them, and they've been really fun to watch in the comments. And don't forget to follow us on Spotify or subscribe on YouTube at Snarl so you never miss an episode creeping your way. And trust me, you'll want to be here for next week's episode for Friday the 13th. Until then, sweet screams.
This week's podcast stories were edited by Sarah Lukasiewicz, narration by Blair Bathory, produced, edited, and mixed by Fitz Harris, executive produced by Gail Gilman, music by Sapphire Sindalo and Calvin Linderman.